we're together for 2 hours. We would like to request that anyone who you meet in the session, and also we've organized, we call it breakout groups, which these are groups of people who we think might benefit from having chats in smaller groups of 5 or 6 people. We'll work out in the group when we do the chat, technology-wise, we've worked out a glitch that we actually can't do it in the session today. But in terms of connecting with each other, I'm going to ask everybody to agree that whoever you are and whichever business you're in, you will not put anybody else in this group on a mailing list unless you get their written permission to do so. What that means is we can share freely, and people can connect and share contact details freely, knowing that nobody is going to be spammed. So if you are in agreement with that, can you please raise your right hand? Can we just check that everyone's got their hands up? Okay, that's everyone. My next question is there anyone in the boardroom today who is a lawyer or who has any legal qualifications? Nobody. All right. Well, I'm going to play that role then. I don't have a legal background, but I am going to say that everyone's hands up means that that's now a legal and binding contract. And Robert, can I ask you, do we have David online yet?
We do.
Okay, so it might be that I don't have enough space on my screen, but I'll ask you shortly to introduce David. Before I do, it's an amazing privilege to have Food Bank in the boardroom session today. And the penalty, if you like, for anyone who cuts across that rule that we just agreed on is 10,000 Australian dollars contribution to Food Bank. Now, my preference is that you make such a contribution of your own free will and because you really care, not because you got penalized by the collective. Okay, so we take that seriously. Please make sure you don't, that nobody spams anybody else. We also just wanted to ask everybody's permission. There are 1 or 2 people who, unfortunately, they signed in, but then they couldn't make it as of this morning. They've asked for a recording of the session. Can I just ask if you are opposed to the session being recorded? Can you raise a hand? Okay, so it looks to me like all hands down. Jenny and Robert, are we okay? Can we push the record button? Okay, fantastic. Thank you. All right, so the way today will work is most of the session will actually be facilitated by Robert and Taminda. I will shortly introduce them and ask them to introduce our special guests. So in the first instance, Robert, I know you were raised in Australia, but your cultural heritage comes from Croatia, Macedonia, Greece, Germany, and Hungary. Yep. I know that you hold a Master's of IT, a Bachelor of Science, and a grad dip in tax. So I'm sure you can hold a conversation or two with Ken. I know that you are nominated to be on the panel of the Accounting Business Expo for 2020, and also that you're a regular advisor to boards on how to use technology to lower risks and to increase profits. I know also that you've been approached to be featured in the CIO Review magazine. You're the CEO, obviously, of OneCloudX. Now, Robert, I thought I was going okay with 4 languages, but you speak Croatian, Macedonian, German, Italian, not to mention English and Australian. Oh. Yeah, what's not well known about you, Robert, is that you represented Australia in the under-16s for soccer before you had a career-ending injury.
Now, can I say that I'm very impressed with Robert, because I used to be a secondary school teacher and a language teacher, in fact, in my other career. So I'm really impressed, Robert, with your efforts.
Yeah, I forgot about it, but it came in handy when I lived in Europe for a few years. Yeah.
And he's only just getting going, I might add. Of course, Robert, you're the co-founder of this Food and Beverage Collective, and you're a co-host for today's session. Everybody, please welcome Robert Jurcek.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Appreciate your kind words, Ant. Very nice.
Rob, I'd like to hand over to you, and I believe you have a special guest to introduce.
Yes. I'd like to introduce Dave McNamara, who is the CEO of Food Bank, to this collective today. Thank you, David, for joining us. I wanted to talk through with you your journey. We've sponsored this event with Food Bank. We're looking at becoming a sponsor ourselves to your initiative and what you stand for. So I'd like to talk through your journey with Food Bank, and from the time you became CEO back in 2013, and the brand it's become today. It's becoming a well-known brand for for us to be able to look at you as an inspiration to helping those who are less fortunate. So yeah, just give us a bit of a background around your journey.
Thanks, Robert. So I started in IT and then moved across into hospitality. And so I was in hospitality for probably 20 years. And a friend of mine who was in the industry as well became homeless, living out of his van down St Kilda Marina. And so myself and other friends would help him out with meals occasionally, just drop in. He was still a mate. And then he told me one day about Sacred Heart Mission, where he was getting meals. And I'd been at Crown Casino running a few venues there for about 7 years and was looking for a change. And I was intrigued by this Sacred Heart Mission. And so I went down and had a look. And there was a role there to look after their meals program. You know, I think I was just blown away by a dining room full of 300 people of all demographics. I think my view of what disadvantage was the old bloke in the park with his bottle in a brown paper bag. And then I saw kids and young girls right up to older people. And then I saw the food that they were eating and I was quite shocked at how poor it was and the fact that my friend was there eating that food. And then I looked at their stores and just thought, we could do better than this. So I took the role. We changed the format from a soup kitchen to a free restaurant based on regional French and Italian cuisine, so peasant style cooking with vegetarian option. And within a few months, we could see people physically changing. The dining room had gone from a quiet place to a lively place of conversation. And I thought, well, that's not enough. So we brought in a barista training course, certificate 2 in hospitality, working with the local restaurants to provide work experience, and then an apprenticeship program. And I guess at that stage, we were customers of Food Bank Victoria, and I didn't think they provided enough quality products. So a role came up there as operations manager, and I was fortunate enough to get that. And the first thing I did was bring in a farms to family program, which was all about fresh produce. And that's grown from, I think it was 50,000 kilos when I first started. It's now over 2.5 million kilos a year. And we run pop-up farmers markets in low-income communities. We've got a rural side to that program where we go to small towns, especially after the bushfires. And we've just sort of really focused the business on the most vulnerable cohort and then worked hard to make sure that we can provide them with food. And so now we run Australia's largest meals program for schools. So we've got, by the end of this year, there'll be 1,000 state schools, primary, secondary, P-12 and specialist. So we provide them with breakfast, emergency lunch, a holiday backpack program, and we're teaching the kids and their parents to cook together and teach them basic food literacy and food cooking skills. So we're really hoping that in the next 12 years, we'll change the social fabric of the state by kids that will be fully engaged in their education journey, but also socially minded and food literate. So they'll have the skills that probably their parents don't have at this stage. Probably some people saw our work during the bushfires and COVID-19. So we also sit on the state emergency relief and recovery plan. So whenever there's a state disaster, we're enacted to partner with Red Cross to deliver food and water. So during Black Summer, we distributed, I think it was something like 15,000 care packs across that region. And now we're building a bushfire recovery plan for the next 3 years to assist those communities. And COVID-19, we partnered with the state government to deliver care packages to people that were put into forced self-isolation for a 2-week period. But the day-to-day is basically focused on those families and individuals that don't have enough money to put food on the table. And we try to make sure that they do. Unfortunately, that's about 140,000 Victorians every month. That's before the bushfires and before COVID-19. I think everyone's seen those unemployment queues. We don't have any actual data yet, but word from our agencies is that the demand has at least doubled to what it was before the event. So some really challenging times coming up for us as a community.
Wow. It's an interesting time, most definitely. So Dave, if you could just put into context some of the facts in the current landscape today around the food hunger report, food bank hunger report that's out there, and kind of give it some context as to, it's not until you kind of are out there and seeing, as you walk the streets, like I live in Paran, and you kind of walk down the street and see more and more people, homeless, more and more people needing help and support. I think if you could put some context around the numbers a bit more, I think that would give us some, better visibility into.
Sure. So I think when people see homeless people, that's only really the tip of the spear, and it's become more and more visual in the last year to two. That population is growing, but really, I think the challenging thing for us as a society is to recognise that over 50% of people looking for emergency food are working families, so they've actually got jobs, and then it's single parents, then it's unemployed, and homeless is one of the smallest cohorts. The challenge for families nowadays is stagnant wage growth, utility costs, housing affordability, and when you see the hundreds of thousands of people that have just been made unemployed, that's just going to put a lot of pressure on us as a society, I think. And so that's why it's important. I think food on the table it's like magic. So it avoids so many issues if there's food on the table for a family. A lot of the domestic violence that we see stems from the fact that, that's an in-your-face to a father or a man that has not the best coping skills. It's a real visual representation of his failure, that he can't even provide for his family or himself. So he usually takes that out, unfortunately, on his children and his wife or partner. So food on that table hopefully averts that. And you can follow that all the way back to the drought, for example, that we had in the Millennium Drought, where you saw so many farm suicides, where farmers who've been generational farmers and providing food for not just their family, but for the nation, suddenly couldn't, whereas their father could and their grandfather could. So they see themselves as failures. And I think what we need to try and do is take away the stigma and the shame about not being able to provide, because as a society, we should be able to come together around food. It shouldn't be divisive, and it shouldn't lead to issues of pain and conflict. It should be about celebration and joy and bringing us together, because that's what civilization was based on, that celebration of food and difference.
Well put. Well, thank you for that. First, I'd like to thank you, Danielle, and the rest of the team at Food Bank for all the work you guys tirelessly do every day out there. And I'd also like to thank everyone who joined us collectively today. I'd like to announce that we've raised a total of $625 for this actual event that goes directly to Food Bank. And Dave, if I'm right in saying that $625 attributes to 1,650 minimum.
That's right. I think that's every dollar donated equates to 2 meals, and that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter where you are in the state. That's 2 meals put on a table, and that could be in Mildura, Orbost, or even Footscray. So I just want to say thank you on behalf of everyone that's attended this conference and committed funds to us as a result. It's every dollar that does count, because 1 meal can change a life. So I just want to thank you on behalf of not just myself and Food Bank, but the people of those 1,300 meals that are going to be received by people out there in the community in what is an unprecedented time of stress and uncertainty. And having a meal on the table brings a degree of certainty and faith that, you know, there's hope for the future. So thank you for all of you for that opportunity to share that food.
Thanks.
Great work, David.
Thank you.
Yeah, great work.
Thank you.
David, before we let you go, I mean, you're welcome to stay for the rest of this collective session, but I understand you might need to leave. Before we let you go, can we ask, there are 30 people in this boardroom, and many are actually senior executives in the food and beverage industry. How can we help in an ongoing fashion? Is there something as simple as, you mentioned, the packing of the care packs? When that happens, is it a high volume of something that needs to be done? And for those who are interested, could we physically turn up on a given day and help pack bags?
Yeah, so there's lots of opportunities to help. It's food, funds, and friends are the 3 Fs that we need. So obviously food, and I think if you're in the food and beverage industry, then that's a gimme. Funds, every dollar donated is 2 meals created. And then from the friends perspective, it's yes, coming and volunteering and helping pick those orders for the charities. So there's 470 charities around Victoria that we're helping. It's packing hampers, helping us with the fruit and veg sorting, even skilled volunteering and helping out looking at our operations, logistics. There's lots of ways that we want to make it open for people to come and help, because everyone has a part to play.
Wow, amazing. Robert, I know you have a personal interest in this area. Can we coordinate through you and you be the connection point with David? Because I sense that there are others in the group who might want to do something, might want to contribute and help make a difference.
Most definitely.
Okay, amazing. Wow. David, thank you so much for what you do. And thank you for being here today.
My pleasure. Thanks, guys.
And I've actually worked in the food bank warehouse packing some goods to go out, and it's a really great experience, and they make it quite fun. So I could wholly attest that it's an awesome experience.
Okay,
Thanks.
incredible. Thanks, Lukja. Okay, it is now my great pleasure to introduce our other co-host for the day, Taminda Pale. And Taminda, I know you hold a Bachelor of Commerce degree with a major in e-commerce and international management. Mm-hmm. I know also that you've delivered keynote talks at the Worldwide Women of Web Forum, the Australian Data and Marketing Association, the ServiceNow Global Conference in Las Vegas, of all places, and the Data Management Association in Australia. I know you're a regular guest on topics such as disruption, business modernization, e-commerce, and on various technology panels. We know that you were a finalist in the Industry Award for Digital Transformation at Optus. You're a Six Sigma Black Belt, and you're currently studying digital disruption, a qualification through the International Management School in Switzerland. I've seen one of your 2 kids, but I know that you're a proud mother of 2 beautiful children. What's not known too widely about you is that prior to the birth of your 2nd child, you actually raced Golf Rs and Golf GTIs as a hobby. Yeah. So for everyone else in the boardroom today, please know Taminda is a bit of a hoon and a petrol head, if I can coin it that way.
Yeah,
and definitely faster than me.
And
faster than you, Francesco.
Yeah.
As your co-host and co-facilitator for today, who will actually now welcome the panel experts, please welcome Taminda Pale.
Thank you. That was an epic introduction.
Have I done my research okay?
Yeah, I feel like you've definitely Googled me substantially and maybe asked a few secret questions of my friends. But thank you and welcome everybody. It's a real pleasure to have you all here today with myself and Rob. I'm really now delighted to introduce our panel experts and get the conversation going around our topic today. So how this will work, we really want this to be very conversational. So I'll do a quick introduction and then we'll get into the topics. And Rob is going to monitor the chat forum as well so that we can share those questions and hand over to yourselves where it is appropriate. So please interact and ask us lots of questions. There will be a formal question session at the end as well. So no further ado, I'd like to introduce Graham Robertson first and foremost. Graham, you say hello. Graham is the former MD of McCormick Foods Australia, the former MD of Tetley Tea Australia, and the former MD of Griffith Laboratories. Also former MD of Jacobs, is it Suchard?
Suchard, yes, Swiss.
Yes. And former GM of Macma Enterprises, which is a manufacturer of frozen food. And not only that, he is a generous coach and mentor to many aspiring entrepreneurs and CEOs and C-suite level. And he's been very generous with my time and Robert's time. So thank you for being here, Graham.
Thank you.
A massive expert in thought leadership on governance, risk, and traceability. I'd like to then hand over and introduce to Francesco Oliveri. Francesco is the head of IT at Perfection Fresh Australia, who's also a proud supporter of Food Bank. He is an expert in digital transformation, data and strategy, over 16 years in technology management and supply chain integration and traceability. He has 2 gorgeous children. We have been on the racetrack together, which I went faster, yay. But also he is a leading participant with the Deakin University Food and Traceability Program, where they're designing a response to the government traceability agenda and protocols. So really hoping we can share some of that discussion today, and welcome and thank you for your time, Francesco. And you're on mute there.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And a really special shout out to Laurent. Laurent has kindly come in literally at 3 o'clock yesterday afternoon. So huge kudos to you, Laurent, for joining. Laurent is from, as we've heard, from Belgium, and is a blockchain solution lead with over 7 years experience in cryptocurrencies and blockchain. And having been one of these early adopters, he's now working tightly to transform this concept and its application across food and beverage and different industries. He was a founding partner of, is it Jason Capital?
Yeah, Jason Capital.
A crypto fund specializing in early stage cryptocurrency and blockchain projects. And he's now working with IBM since 2019 to transform companies and industries like that we all represent. You also hold a Bachelor of Marketing from Belgium too.
Thank you, Taminda.
Thank you, Laurent.
Great intro.
Yes, so we promised we'd be a little bit kind on Laurent because he's only had a few hours of preparation, but I'm sure you don't need that at all. So let's get started. So the topic today is very much around traceability across the food and beverage supply chain. So from the beginnings of the farm all the way to its final destination nationally and globally. And with all the recent, all the publicity over the last couple of years about various pandemics or blackmail attempts in our food supply chain, and the potential conversation around more severe contagious viruses happening over the next couple of years, many of us now are looking and future scanning and ensuring that our organizations are protected with various different scenarios that may come today. So our objective with the expert panelists and yourselves is to discuss and debate some of our thinking about how this concept of traceability stands in today's market and where do we see the evolution of traceability moving forward. So to start with, I'd like to ask the same question of Graham and then Francesco. Graham, how do you define traceability today, and do you see that the topic of traceability has actually changed in the last year or 18 months?
I'll actually answer the second one first, and you'll see how the two are linked, hopefully. As it moves along the community, which is the supply chain, through the community from inception, that is infection and transmission, to ICU. And so I think it's quite an interesting way to look at this. And I think certainly from the point of view of the crisis management response by the National Cabinet and the governance around how the country set up their response. The proof is in the eating. If you look at the Australian outcome, not only the number of cases, but also the number of the deaths, the cohesion, fundamentally social cohesion, and also political cohesion, apart from a couple of breakouts. The hotspots that we've had, the Ruby Princess, the nursing home in Sydney, the Burnie, Tasmania one, and the meat packing one down here in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago. Once they've been identified, they've been jumped on fairly quickly, because at the end of the day, traceability is fundamentally about containing the risk. So as you're aware, you've got, in terms of risk profiling, you've got the probability of occurrence on one scale, on one axis, and the severity on the other. The only difference between the pandemic and the product contamination type risk that is normally on the top of most people's risk registers is that the pandemic has low probability and it's not controllable. Certainly not controllable at source until we get an antidote for this. Controllable from the point of view of the crisis management response. The severity, the high severity, is controllable. You only have to look at the Australian impact and versus the US impact. Whereas product contamination, it's got low probability, hopefully. It is controllable. And the high severity is also controllable because traceability fundamentally is about, rather than having a big funnel where lots of things are in motion, the whole issue of traceability is to bring that funnel in and narrow it so you can contain the risk. So they're intertwined. I don't see them. Yeah. Obviously, the pandemic it gives everybody a chance to say, okay, when all this is over, let's review our risk register. It's a board issue. It's certainly a senior management issue, and hopefully, when all this is over, CEOs and boards will take a more strategic perspective of risk management.
Thank you, Graham. And that's a nice segue over to Francesco. Thank you for sharing the strategic governance view of traceability. Francesco, at Perfection Fresh, in your opinion, how are you seeing, I guess, the tactics and the application and your definition of traceability and the importance from in the supply chain?
I might start, probably with the definition of traceability, just to frame it a little bit more, and with the definition that Food Standards Australia give us, with the ability to track any food through all stages of production, processing, and distribution. And currently, Food Standards Australia, the definition also includes the fact that we're able to track it one step up and one step down the supply chain. I just want to mention it because it's important in this conversation, especially when we look into the future and what I believe the future of traceability will be compared to what it is now and what it's been. You mentioned in the last 12 to 18 months, but I can actually add that, yes, there have been a few advances in the last year or so, but fundamentally, with the practical application of traceability, in the last 10 to 14 years, it hasn't changed that much, the practical application. Yeah, I can speak about the fresh produce industry in particular, not in general or the food and beverage industry, but for the fresh produce industry. I was reviewing, I've been with Perfection Fresh for the last 15 years, and one of the first things that I read around this was a report from the Produce Market Association 14 years ago. And that report was outlining a couple of issues and gaps in the traceability that was starting to get implemented. This was in the US. And two of the main issues that they had around traceability was the a lack of consistent identification aligned with that standard, and also, even more importantly, the lack of integration between internal tracking system that some company already had back then and external system. So if you want to talk about traceability and how it changed and what changed in the last few years, I believe practical implementation haven't changed that much yet, but we are on the verge on a big change that is coming, because there's a lot more pressure now from the consumer in particular, and from the government with all the issues that we had with food security. So there's a lot of pressure. There's a lot of players in the market now that are playing in the traceability space, a lot of different technology solutions. And so I think we'll have hopefully soon we'll see this traceability that historically has been just based on going just one step up, one step down. We'll hopefully soon we'll be able to give us a more broader view of the entire supply chain.
Yeah, thank you. I'll jump down to Laurent. Laurent, what are you seeing in the industry and from your perspective on this topic of traceability?
Yeah, sorry. I think Francesco kind of nailed it here. I think the technology side is just the enabler. Technology. I mean, traceability is not new. It's been done for a lot of years now, but it's been fairly limited. I think a lot of it is still being done manually. Some of the processes, just because there's no integration between all the participants, which is what Francesco is alluding here. I think the obvious here, it's unfortunately a very difficult process. It doesn't work in isolation. So it's all linked to digital transformation, and so you've got organizations that have fairly advanced in that path, and some who are not. And so how do you start sharing information? So I think organizations have a good grip now, tracing, stuff inside the perimeter. But as soon as you get out of it, if it dissolves or it becomes very complex, and then you're always pushing the boundaries. You've got your company, and then you've got your city, your states, and then you've got your country, and then you've got the world. And so all of it, adds frictions. And all of it is taking a piece, of the value chain that exists in the supply chain. And when you look at export like food and beverage to Australia, which is massive, the big chunk of money here that's just going to people that just enable your goods to move. And so I think this friction is going to be removed. So technology has evolved now, I think, to a point where it will help. We've seen the advance of what at IBM we call the exponential technologies, which are stuff like AI, automation, IoT, 5G, and of course blockchain, that are now becoming mature enough to be used and to start adding value to businesses. And so digital transformation plus the advance of those technologies, together will allow for traceability at a technical level. Now the challenge is, and I think both Graham and Francesco have alluded to this, the challenge is around standardization of the data that's being traced and what you're going to trace. And so I know obviously we talked about the initiatives with the universities and the agriculture departments. There is still a fragmented approach, I think, in Australia and around the world about how you can standardize some of those data so it makes sense and it can move from one company to another regardless of the technology stack they're using, which is important. So I think there's a lot of good work being done in the country. I think there's a real kind of awakening about that, and it's still work in progress. And there is also some focus at the international level, because unfortunately we're not living in a bubble. And so if you implement a system but they do something different in China or in Europe or in the States, then your system is almost dead here. And so there is some coordination that needs to be done. But definitely, I think the technology, is there to enable, whatever framework would be put in place. And I think open source, to finish with, the open source is the key here. That will allow everybody to play with it.
Actually, Francesco, we were discussing about your activities with Deakin University and the importance of the open source approach to data in traceability. We mentioned as well, now that I guess one of the things I wanted to get to as well is the cost of technology to date, IoT and blockchain and investments across supply chain, particularly when you're moving small punnets of tomatoes versus lobsters, actually becomes a cost benefit conversation. Francesco, can you explain further as to how you've actually used traceability as a source of value and a competitive edge, both internally to bring departments together, but also externally with your brand?
I have to start by saying that we are too at the beginning of this journey ourselves. And so we don't have the solution for everyone and everything. We've been doing traceability, internal traceability, as per the government requirements for many years. We've done it pretty well on that front, but we're trying to build more across all the steps of the supply chain, and the traceability definition has tracking but also tracing, and with tracing is also a matter of not just knowing, for example, where the product is along the supply chain, but also what happened to that product along the supply chain. And that's the thing that we're trying to put in place now and trying to automate. As Laurent was saying before, digital transformation together with standardization is the most complicated thing to do, especially the more you go back in your supply chain, the more you get closer to the farm, the harder that digital transformation becomes, because every farm is different, every producer is different, every product is different. So as you were saying about the cost, is trying to find the balance where you can implement all these different transformation without adding too many costs in the supply chain.
Can I just comment as well? I suppose from my side of things, I'm from a small business, and it's probably a very different world to say different businesses that are maybe more global and wider. And for us as a company, implementing things like HAZUP, obviously to allow us to do traceability and so forth. But that started many years ago for us, and also looking into BRC. I suppose what I'm representing are the small businesses, the startups who may not even be looking at traceability and may not even consider that. They're just looking at making their products and moving along. So there's a bit of quite a wide, range of information. And how do you get that, traceability and understanding of all that to smaller businesses in an affordable, fast way, and bringing it all together so we can sort of really, deliver value? Because I know from our end, for our customers from the very beginning, I suppose they were attracted to our brand because it's, clean label has always been very focused, and also, clear label is obviously a major trend in our brands from our consumer sort of point of view. But obviously from food safety, again, all that complexity of tracing and understanding the microbes and all that through the HAZUP or BRC systems that we implement too. So bringing it all together, because you're going to have more small companies coming into this space as well. So that's what I would say. Yeah, just bringing it to making it affordable for small companies to implement and to, be clear and consistent. But it's very true. There's a real divide by trying to get to the farmer and then to, the other side. So from that, from my perspective, that's probably,
Hence why, Tony, you're right. And that's one of the biggest challenges, trying to understand some of the players in the supply chains, the value of traceability. And that's when you have to make it sustainable. You need to introduce other factors that are not just related to food safety. You need to introduce business process improvement, saving in the way they operate. You need to introduce an advantage against your competitors with the consumers. If the consumers are able to understand the provenance of food, and understand not just the provenance, but also understand what happened to that product along the supply chain. As I was saying before, what we're trying to implement right now in bringing a bit of automation in collecting this information along the supply chain in regards, for example, in maintaining the cold chain from farm to the retailers, and make sure that all the different data points are recorded by IoT, so that, and then they're linked to the particular lot number, so that doing it that way without having to have any change in the way the processes are on farm, that doesn't impact on the farmer and the way they do work, but it brings extra information. Also helps, for example, in that case, it might help the farmer or the transport company to understand with alerts when that product is going above temperature or below temperature. So that helps with the traceability, but also gives an incentives on why you would do that. Because sometimes otherwise it's very hard to justify the numbers for the investment if you just look at food safety.
I think the story you tell with your brand as well. So the story that as brands we can tell about, quality of ingredient, clean ingredients, where it's come from, is it Australian, grown? Now with the pandemic, we know that, that's going to be a real focus, Australian grown, Australian made. And then brands can tell that story to drive consumer want and to, then hopefully improve the supply chain. And it's like a flood, because ultimately it's the consumer that's going to drive, all of this. So the more they want to demand it, and the technologies behind it.
Do you think the consumer is, sorry, Graham, sorry.
That's what we're finding anyway.
All right, you go, Francesco. I know
I was just asking that question, and if the people on this panel think that the consumer is actually prepared to pay a little bit more for this brand recognition, because that's another critical question that we get asked all the time. But you think that if we introduce extra cost in supply chain, someone will have to pay for it if you don't get the required savings. So do you think the consumer is prepared to do that?
I think we've seen, we've just been used to cheap food coming into Australia, and there's a lot of pressure to create cheaper and cheaper food with less nutrition, because by the time you make cheap food, cheaper and cheaper, you're basically taking out nutrition and other things, and there's a real pressure there. So I think this pandemic in particular is highlighting that we need to have, biodiverse ingredients, we need to have quality, and people have to step up and pay a little bit extra for that. And it's opening up a conversation around, all of that at the moment.
Or can I be controversial and maybe also then point back to Graham on this one? What responsibility does the C-suite have in these larger, wholesale, like Coles and Woolworths and Aldi?
Well, I was about to add, Connie. I mean, I work for a lot of I've come from the big multinationals in terms of my corporate career, but these days I work for SMEs. In fact, I've got 3 food companies that 2 of which I'm on advisory boards for, others I strategically advise all those. 3 of my young entrepreneurs are in food, and so I think that focusing on the bits you can control is fairly critical. Like if you look at a triangle, okay, you've got operational integrity down the bottom here, and that's got HACCP and ISO and GMP and preventive maintenance and pest control. You've got the risk register over here, which is knowing where your risks are and how you classify them in terms of probability and severity, which ends up with a high, medium, and low. And then up the top, you've got the traceability and tracking. So there's the triangle. But the thing that pulls it all together, the circle around that, is the quality management system. And the quality management system, for most of us in the room, there are various principles, but the main one, there's usually 7 principles. It's consumer focused. It's a leadership to provide the purpose, direction, and engagement, which is a bit that Tamara just touched on. And that's the bit that I'm pretty much was always all over as a CEO. And on behalf of the owners and the shareholders of the companies I deal with at the moment, that's also the bit that I'm all over.
Graham, you said in our previous conversation, and I know there's quite a few talented people on this call that work at C-suite around leadership and behaviour and cultural change. How important is culture and leadership in traceability from a governance perspective?
Well, it's absolutely critical. I mean, the bottom line is that CEOs of whether they're corporations or family-owned businesses or medium-sized businesses, I mean, we spend a lot of time on employee well-being through OH&S, and in some companies that's the first agenda item on management meetings. It certainly was at McCormick. It was really high on the agenda. But the other side you've got is the consumer well-being, because we have got a responsibility to provide a safe product. So from my point of view, you need demonstrated leadership on this, and demonstrated leadership comes from the top, and it's walking the talk on stuff like this. Now, how does that translate into a management meeting type situation? Is you actively review at least one of the risk areas on your risk analysis each month. To have that discussion. I bet you pandemics are going to come up mainly about, how did we handle that? Like, I'm a great believer in treating every situation as a learning situation. A lot of people, I shouldn't say that. When the shit hits the fan, you might do an assessment. But it's equally important when everything's goes swimmingly well. It's not just get the champagne out, smoke the cigars, and say, "Geez, didn't we do a great job?" It's actually going back and doing the same thing, and it's pretty simple. It's what did we do well, and we should continue to do. What did we do okay, but would tweak? What are those tweaks? What did we completely stuff up, and we need to stop? And are there things that we should have done that we didn't think of at the time? So they're the start. So it's pretty simple. Continued change, start, stop. Very, very. I'm big on frameworks.
I could tell. I might hold you there, Graham, because I know Renee.
So therein lies the leadership, and that comes from the CEO, the board, and the management group.
Thank you, Graham. I might just defer to Renee, because I know, Renee, your business is definitely contributes to this area. I know you've got something to add to the conversation.
Yeah, I think, and totally agree with what Graham's saying. I think it's the constant and never-ending improvements. And I think a big thing I'm seeing, and I'm at the moment across about 20 industries, so I'm seeing similar commonalities, leading and getting everything to cascade down from the top. And I think what is getting missed a bit is you've got to make sure others are involved. It's not just the leadership team.
Yes.
So I've got I like frameworks too, Graham. So around cross leadership. So making sure that, we're managing up across direct reports, other divisions, internal and external stakeholders. And, we all know a company that's done this well for many years is Toyota. They've brought in Kaizen, which is small improvements, and every single thing that they've come up with that's been successful has been a collaborative. It's come from the whole business, and I think that's important. People before progress, you've got to talk about all these policies and all the risks and everything. But I think involving and even getting people that aren't in big leadership positions, they're the ones that I'm seeing shine at the moment. It's been really interesting. Some of them, we're all leaders of self, but some of these leaders out there that have sort of status quo mindset have really lifted. And I think it's a great time, doesn't matter what business you're in, at what level, to really, be open, innovate, be involved, but it comes from the top in allowing that. And I think biggest change COVID, biggest thing I'm seeing and I'm excited about is I think companies, I actually do a lot of work with GS1, companies that are embracing change and taking with them the innovation and creativity that's happened in a short time are going to be embracing risk a lot more easily and effortlessly and sharing that than they were before.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Renee, because you go back to that first question that was asked. I mean, where do you go? Everybody we go to the networks.
Yeah.
And we had a big discussion around networks, and that's outside people.
Yeah.
But the biggest source of information for solving problems is inside the organisation. You just have to create the right environment, and that's the leader's job.
Yeah.
And the leader just has to listen and facilitate and not jump in and give people solutions. Okay, because the biggest issue with decision making is you go to the first solution straight off. You don't go and explore the options and then go through the process of which best. And then ask the most important question in decision making is what's the impact on people? Now, that can be internal people or external people, customers.
Yeah.
So decision making's all in this as well. And that is the role of the leader, not to jump in and say, okay, here's the problem, here's the solution, you do this, you do that, you do that. And everybody says, well, what the hell are we doing in this meeting for?
Yeah. That's right. And the companies that have or are finally embracing a coach-centric culture are the ones that are questioning and not telling and empowering people.
And
coach-centric. That's a good word, coach-centric culture. That's
and I love that. I might actually ask Rabin just to jump in with your important comment that you put in the chat there.
Oh, around psychological safety.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of Amy Edmondson, who touched on this with her book, The Fearless Organisation. And in an environment now where no one knows, no one has any experience of a pandemic of this nature, we have to go beyond expert. And I think that's exactly what everyone's talking about, is inviting everyone to the table to have those discussions. So organisations that have fostered psychological safety, where people can actually speak up, report the mistakes, report the things that have gone wrong, have a far better likelihood of innovating around those opportunities and around those risk areas than those that are still doing a top-down hierarchical, the biggest paid person speaks the most type environment. And I can see it in our membership and across the clients that I'm working with, that those leaders who get it, is how I describe it, that understand that psychological safety and the ability to be vulnerable to speak up is how you reach your new levels of innovation. What to let go of is the hardest discussion that most organisations need to face into right now. It's that white knuckle around the past. How do we encourage people to experiment and let some of these things go to embrace the new context that we're finding ourselves in?
Thank you, Rabin. I might jump to Laurent just quickly, because Laurent, I'm interested in, I'll come back to you, Graham. Rabin's just touched on that important notion of, people are saying the pandemic is the biggest enabler of digital transformation over the last few years, and now people are having to let go and go into new technologies and new ways of working. What conversations or tactics can you share to the group as to how to drive a digital transformation or new opportunities in this supply chain?
I think, I'm going to try to answer this. It's obviously a very large topic. I think what's very obvious to me following this discussion is, and it's really important for everyone here to understand, is that traceability doesn't live in isolation. And a lot of the discussion I've got now is traceability as the cornerstone of a kind of efficient, sustainable supply chain. So companies, if you do traceability because governments as a burden, it's put a burden on you to kind of do this, it costs you money, and you will always see it as a cost center. But what we see is a shift here between how can we use traceability to make money? How can we start using it to start, removing those friction, those efficiencies? And so, you see traceability in food, but you see traceability, everywhere. In tires, I've seen the other day, I've seen in following plastic and being circular economy. And so, you see organizations starting to implement traceability solutions because having visualization and real-time data allows them to make better decisions and start removing waste, with these problems. And so I think it's important to see that traceability will probably be the base of a lot of different things. Food safety is one of them. But, for a food business, for example, a farmer that needs to finance, there's no reason why a bank would maybe start using the same data to start helping financing some of those trades, for example, or an insurance company be able to use the same data to start decreasing a premium. And so those technologies will start, and those information will start being used by side organization that's not specifically in your supply chain, or you don't think they are, and will start embedded themselves to kind of help you do business. And I think that's where we're going. And the tactic, it's really about building ecosystems that everybody is benefiting. And to come back to some of the comments at the beginning, what's in there for a small farmer, what's in there for a transporter, what's in there for a retailer. I think what you see, it's the balance between who's taking and who's giving, and who's taking generally pays the bill. So, if you're a big retailer in the food business, that data is very important for you because you can manage your inventory much better. And that's hundreds of millions of dollars of saving potential. If you're a farmer, well, you're just giving information. So maybe it should be free for you. So all those kind of mechanisms and balance are going to be put in place, I think, in the future. So I'm not sure I've really answered your questions.
No, definitely. Yeah. Thank you, Lauren. Francesca, did you want to add any tips or, I guess, conversations that you've had internally or externally to spark the importance of investing in data and digital for traceability or risk management? So maybe someone to help start a conversation in their own businesses?
Yeah, those conversations are pretty hard at the moment, just because, as I said, there's a lot of players in the industry that are trying to propose their solution, and there is not a common ground, and there's not a common agreement in the supply chain to understand which solution or which standard we should be using. Hence, internally, to take this to the next level, we're kind of sitting on the fence right now, and sitting on the fence, participating in a lot of different groups. We're working with the retailers to understand consumer demands and their operational challenges. We're trying to understand the farm requirements and educating the importance on traceability, and also trying to provide them some tools. But we're also contributing to multiple working groups. You mentioned dating before, but also GS1, with the GS1 data embedded barcode work group. Because internally, that's our experience, we are kind of scared to start a big investment going towards a particular route without knowing that would be the standard that would be utilized in the industry, because we can't afford to be in a situation, especially in a small market like Australia is, where there would be multiple requirements, for example, for multiple retailers in regards to traceability. We need to come up as an industry to one standard that can be utilized. Otherwise, instead of introducing saving in the supply chain, we're going to start bringing in more cost.
Yeah.
So hence why those conversation and the investment conversation in regards to traceability right now are be hard internally, and if they don't bring immediate gains in productivity, then there's no investment at the moment. But a lot of things are happening in the industries that was mentioned before. Woolworths is actually taking the forefront for the retailers in regards to this, and they're spinning up a couple of big projects to look at as a solution. And I believe with them being the first mover, being the largest obviously retailer, if they come up with something that is open, it would be something that would be implemented across the supply chain.
Yeah, I mean, I'm old enough to be around when bar scan codes, which ultimately morphed into GS1. I've been around long enough to see when that wasn't even there, and the same issues were discussions we've been having then about one standard, too many players, too many opinions, and eventually, through I guess all the players getting together. I mean, it should be a lot easier for Australia, okay? And we are small, and we've got a concentration of retail trade. Now, normally that economically works against us, but when you're talking about step change here and the utilisation of step change technologies like blockchain, I don't know a lot about blockchain, and I know I'm not alone. Maybe if we knew a lot more about blockchain, in terms of the crypto stuff, the currency stuff's about the only window I've got, and I don't like that. So I think the challenge for Laurent, and it might be an interesting topic for another one of these collective discussions, is actually how you leverage blockchain and AI. I'm sure that's going to be part of the future. I mentioned the other day when Laurent and I were talking, when we were talking about this in general terms. I mean, there must be some way of using nanotechnology to put a dot on something. And that dot's got the fingerprint of where it came from when it came off the farm. And that goes all the way through the system. It carries its dot with it. And we're trying to do this to track dolphins. I'll relate that conversation to you because you can't. My daughter discovered a new species of dolphin in Port Phillip Bay, and you can't track dolphins. Okay, you can't. They're not like sharks and whales. You can't actually attach anything to them. You can put suction cups, actually, which we're looking at, but we're trying to work out how we can put a fingerprint on the dorsal. At the moment, Kate takes DNA and extracts it and does the analysis. That's how she discovered the new species. But there's got to be a different way. And so I'm trying to encourage her to jump ahead somehow and find a little dot that can go on these little buggers so we can work out where they all go.
Yeah. Laurent, I feel like you have something you could add to...
No, I mean, it's a very good point. And those technologies are coming. I think there's often these discrepancies between the technology exists and it can be mass produced and used at cost for a retailer. For example, there's 40,000 products. Do they ever put a dot on everything and then it becomes too expensive? I think on your comment on blockchain, it's definitely for another time. It's a rabbit hole to kind of dig into that. But what I would welcome you to look at, it's what's being done in overseas. In the States, they started in with proper ecosystem. Where multiple retailers are sharing, in the same ecosystem with their suppliers. And so you create a place where that data can start flowing. Europe has got the same. And so there are some around food, there are some around other goods. But I mean, this is probably going to come to Australia at some stage. There are projects on the go in the banking sector, kind of like this, obviously in the food industry. Francesco touched a bit on a lot of different players, but I mean, there are stuff happening using blockchain, which is just bridging, different organizations and be able to share in a safe manner. And I believe that this is just a question of time. Australia, I think, is cautious by nature. They're not specifically the country that's going to jump first on innovation, but when they see value, I think it moves rather quickly, just because of the point you made. It's only a few retailers, is very concentrated here, and so if Woolies and Coles agree on something, then everybody's going to have to do it, and then it goes like in one shot. So we just have to be patient. I think there's a lot of discussion going on all around the place, and I think we're going to start seeing something, but it all depends on you guys to develop and set up a framework that work and that it's adopted by everybody around open source data and be able to share this information regardless of the technology you're using.
Yeah, I think also Laurent, to add to that, it is I know there's a concentration of retailers in Australia, but the problem I see here is that even with a small number of players, there's not much willingness to cooperate, and that's not just between the retailers, but also inside the industry. I came from Italy 15 years ago, and if you look at the way the industry works, obviously they are competing, but they are collaborating a bit more on fundamental issues and standards that can benefit the entire industry. Here, we're still struggling to be able to collaborate internally. And if you struggle to collaborate inside your industry, then how can you even go to the retailers and proposing, for example, one solution for traceability, something that is open? It's hard to do that if you're fragmented, even on that side of the supply chain. Today, I remember I was part of GS1 even 13 years ago in Australia. We were trying to even come up with one single format for a label to put on a product. And Woolworths and Coles in the same room, and we couldn't come up with a decision at the end.
Yeah, crazy.
And today, every single retailer has got a different label with a different information, with different format. So the farmers that supplies to many retailers needs to have different format to be able to adhere to all the specification, and it makes no sense.
And pushes unnecessary costs and inefficiency.
Exactly.
Francesco, this is where the government's got some space here, I think. To some extent, they need to drive a little bit of that framework, or at least, the skeleton of it, so it can move forward. So they've done it with the open banking. I mean, it wasn't going anywhere neither until they stepped in, for example. So I think for the food industry, there might be some similar kind of need for government to step in and kind of not impose a specific technology, but impose maybe a set of rules that are kind of fit for the country and fit internationally.
I'd like to point something that Daniel had mentioned around cost component. Because obviously there's a cost involved from business in order to implement these initiatives. So Daniel, would you want to expand on that?
Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. So I suppose with that piece, it's the cost of quality is going to be inevitable. Yeah. You're either going to have to do it when you plan to do it, and everyone's going to love to have a budget that clearly spells out what they're going to spend and when they're going to spend it, or there will be an incident should that occur, and then you'll incur that charge as an OTI off the books, and then you have to reprioritize for that. So it's almost that that mental shift from do I have to do this to having the best case scenario and actually planning for it. Just the same as in our risk management plans, no one's planning for a pandemic to hit tomorrow. No one's planning to put listeria in food and send it out to a major retailer and distribute it nationally, but you still include these things in your risk management plan in the unlikely event that they occur. So budgeting for these things is always going to help you out in the longer term. I think the frame behind that comment, in my mind, comes from recognizing that we've got an increasing pace of our supply chain, not just in Australia, but in a global economy overall. So a bit of background myself, I've been in FMCG beverages for about 13 years in warehousing and finance roles. So I guess I've seen firsthand that the importance to try and get product to market, get it manufactured, get it out to meet retailers' 75% MLAW requirements. So you find that cost of quality, you need to incur that at the stage of manufacture. So you actually make sure you're distributing the right product at the right pace. Rather than not doing that process, getting your product out to market quickly and then having to initiate a withdrawal or be forced to initiate a recall. So it's just that call out where that cost component is going to be incurred. It's up to you to decide whether you're going to do it to ensure that your products are of quality and are safe for consumption, and you're going to budget your money, or you will be reactive and you'll spend the money when you're told to do it and you've potentially already caused harm.
And potentially done irreparable damage to your business. I think, Graham, you mentioned just in the last week alone, there's been 2.
I was just about to raise that.
If you want to share a news article, because
I mean, regardless of the COVID and the wake-up call that might give us on risk management and our registers, Aldi had a recall of their cloudy apple juice this week, and a little business up in the back of Burke somewhere had also their dip product, a baba ganoush product recalled as well. So I think the whole issue of creating a burning platform and around the right product in the right place, the right pace, I think that is a great way of putting it. Because not only is it the cost, even if you're really good on the containment and the tracing, and we're able to reduce this net, increasingly we were in a litigious environment, and certainly with cases going through with firms, it makes it it makes it more financially as a downside. But the biggest issue is the damage to brand, and you can never quantify the damage to brand, because you only see it if things start to drop off, and it takes you a long time to recover your brand. And even the Aldi one, there's been Coles and Woolworths ones. They've got private label. They're increasingly exposed. That's not just all of us as primary brand makers. So maybe that's the basis of common interest and self-interest that might take hold sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Graham.
At the same time, with that piece, sorry to interrupt, Taminda. I think the second piece of that as well is, without detracting from the comments you made earlier, Connie, around that consumer and that cost component, I think we need to look to the likes of Dick Smith's Foods. I think everyone on the label at face value will say, I want to buy Australian, I'll do whatever it takes to make that happen. So if you put a product on the shelf that is the best it can be, with the best local ingredients, with the less carbon footprint, with the best quality that's gone into it, and you price that accordingly, the unfortunate reality is that consumers are always going to vote with their wallet. Yeah. So on face value, they want one thing, but then when it comes to the shop front, they're doing another. So I think that's the biggest challenge, where it's that reality that consumers do vote with their wallet. Is there a silver bullet answer? Not exactly.
Yeah, particularly with the fact that we're just seeing drastic unemployment, the pressure. And we heard from David from Food Bank about people are going hungry, and it's not. This is only going to increase. So that balance is going to be really challenging for us as an industry. How do we prioritize our investment in smart digital choices or cultural programs that actually drive real value to everybody? I wanted to thank you for that point, Daniel. I wanted to just jump to Rabeen, because she's just shared a document with the group. Rabeen, do you mind just giving some context to what you shared?
Oh, sure. So I just dropped that in there because it's something I've been using with my clients lately, and some of you would have come across this before. It's around when we're thinking about the future, understanding that it's not set. And we have a practice of futurists within Ahoy Hoy who talk to this much better than I do. I'm just the humble coordinator wrangler person. But when we're thinking about the future, nothing is set. And so what COVID has come out as in the futurist world, they think of that as a black elephant, which is it was known but not really accepted or understood by the wider community, whereas a lot of other people have been describing it as a black swan, so there's just a distinct difference there between how plausible, probable these things might be. And it's just another way to think about, and one of the things we do is help teams understand, when you're sitting around doing your strategy, what future are you thinking about? Are you thinking that we're coming out of restrictions in 6 months' time or in a year? Are you thinking that unemployment's going to go up or down? Like, we've all got implicit ideas about the future, and working with your team to make it explicit can do you a huge favour when putting together these risk and emergent plans coming out of situations all the time, not just to do with COVID. So I hope that might be useful.
Thank you, Rabeen, for sharing. Yeah. I may see, I just want to check the chat. I may open the floor to some questions to our panelists. Has anyone got a specific question to one of our panelist members? Please speak up. Oh, bit silent here because I've got a few more questions, but I'm sure you guys have got some, or even just some comments of what you've been seeing in your industry.
Oh, can I share something? I suppose for small businesses, one thing that I've seen that's come up that's been really significant is the development of food clusters. So we originally were part of the Plenty Food Group, which was a very small food cluster in Melbourne's north. And then over the last couple of years, we've now seen the emergence of other clusters such as Melbourne's North Food Group and other clusters in Gippsland and so forth. That's been a vehicle in which to communicate more clearly to the food industry as a group. So all these issues are being brought down to the level that, say, small businesses, could be someone that's even working from their own home, in their own kitchen, having to address these issues. And that's how the government has also assisted. We also are part of Northlink in the north as well. So again, communicating with manufacturers and the food industry and that's been a significant change for, I believe, the food industry, because it can be a very, very isolating place if you're a small business working on your own and then having to deal with the complexities of labeling, compliance, working with the majors as you progress. So that's been, I think, a real positive in the last couple of years to get information out. And hopefully the issues that you're speaking about traceability will eventually be, coming down to the level that will be, I suppose the pieces around education. You need to continue to educate. All of the food industry needs to learn and educate and evolve with these, growing technologies and information. And it's not always available to small businesses to evolve and to grow. So the clusters are very significant.
Was that something, Connie, that I guess it was community led or small producer led that drove the outcome there, and now you've got that established. Stephen, I think you wanted to. Hi, Stephen, welcome.
Yeah, I did. I had a question. So, of the experts. So, what I was going to say is, given that the adoption of this type of system is going to require a centralised standard of some sort, and I think it was touched on earlier, I think by Laurent, that we would need government to play a role in this. In order to set up those standards, because the sort of tracing and transformation that we're talking about, if someone goes out and does it on their own, it's not going to be successful because it's across too many industries and across too many companies. So, firstly, does the panel agree with that, and do they see that government needs to take at least some sort of role in setting standards, or do you think it can be led by private industry?
Any particular panelists want to take that one on?
Happy to jump in, and obviously Francesco is probably even better placed than me because he's been involved in those discussions. So maybe Francesco, you want to?
Yeah, definitely. There has to be some sort of involvement by the government, at least setting the directions and setting at least a framework that company have to work with. Obviously, the government will never specify exactly which vendor you need to use and which technology in particular you need to use, but at least the open standard need to be defined. And otherwise, as you said, an individual player like ourselves, for example, can't just go out and implement whatever they think is correct, because it's an ecosystem.
I've got a contrary view. My contrary view is based on my involvement when I was in the line as a CEO, which is nearly 10 years ago now. I was very active in the Australian Food and Grocery Council, and I sat on a couple of committees in that. And the whole move to what evolved as, or eventually transformed into GS1 and barcoding and stuff, that was a similar situation. I intrinsically worry about the government being the first response because we'll end up with a whole stack. Well, the propensity to end up with a whole stack of prescriptive and too tight. Even today, the definition of food categories, look at soy milk and rice milk and blah, 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 blah. They're not really milk because those food standards don't actually define any of that stuff as milk. So I just worry about the government being the primary response. I think, we are all in the food industry. And I don't know what shape the Australian Food and Grocery Council's in these days. But in my day, we had really, really strong leadership. We had strong technical director. We had great, I guess, camaraderie on a pre-competitive basis, and that's the key, because you will not get Coles, Woolworths, and others. As soon as you go into that the competitive base, you're going to run into trouble. It's got to be couched in pre-competitive, otherwise you're going to run into trade practices and all sorts of issues. But it is possible, is all I'm saying. I don't think it's totally a government thing.
Thank you, Graham. Laurent, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just want to add this, because I actually agree with both of you, and I think it needs to have the flexibility. Yeah, I mean, it's a bit cheesy, but the flexibility needs to be there. But one of the main issues, especially when you look at traceability, it's you're crossing different industries that have sometimes nothing related. A transporter, might be transporting food, but might be transporting coal or sheep or whatever, something else. And so how do you get those organizations that have different bodies that, running them to agree? And so I think that's where the government fits, not with a strong hand, but more with making sure that we're not going to end up with 15 different frameworks, slightly different, but all the same. And that has happened in a lot of industries. I've been involved in a bank guarantee project in Australia, where each bank were doing the exact same thing, slightly different. And so we've helped them standardize this. And now they're all going to save a lot of money because, well, everybody, the consumer, the beneficiaries. And I think that's where, or there is someone above everyone that can kind of drive this. And in my opinion, the government's pretty well the best place to drive this. But of course, if you give them too much power, then they're going to end up by killing it, basically.
Yeah. Hey, I have another question. Stephen Lewis, is that answering your question for the panel before I jump to another Stephen?
Yes, thank you. Please go ahead. Thank you.
I'd like to welcome Stephen Alexander. I believe you had a question or a comment. So over to you, Stephen.
And I just thought it might be useful to sort of add into consideration for the panel. And I should just say that my background, I've worked on supply chains. I'll go back again, some of the aging here, back to EDI in Tesco in the UK, who originally created the whole concept of a supply chain, just in delivery. And then in Silicon Valley, where the new technology then was with XML, and where we put the first major digital exchanges together for the automotive industry and others. And more recently, I spent almost a year traveling around the world looking at the blockchain, supply chains, and other areas. And even if you look at health, so I was the architect in this country of the personal electronic health record. It's a supply chain. It's an individual going through a continuum of care. They're all supply chains. So there are lessons to be learned. Okay, I've listened carefully. All of the conversations you're having now, others are having today. They've had them before you, and some will have them tomorrow. And I think what might be useful is just looking at what's been learned. What do we actually know in relation to the whole notion of providence? And what you're talking about is a good idea, but will it work? Okay, the odds are absolutely not. Okay. 70-80% of the technologies relating to all of this fail, even by the admission of those who charge the money to build it. Health record being a classic. We burnt through 4 or 5 billion here. UK burnt through 18 billion pounds. Doesn't work. Okay, and the technology works, but how many people use it? How many doctors use the health record today? Almost none. And if you calculate how many users there are versus 4 billion, you'll see how much those digital records are worth. So the ones that do work, they're gold. And so in principle, a single standard has never worked. And according to Tannenbaum, we established this 20 years ago in Silicon Valley, should never work and can't work. Because whoever controls the standard controls everything. Okay, so what you need is an exchange, which is the whole reason of XML, so that you need protocols and standards, but you need to translate them. Because as pointed out in the chat, you know, with the medical, you have to interoperate. So unless Australia is going to go it alone and cut itself off from supply from the rest of the world, it can't invent its own standard, as it tried with health. Okay, so number one is in principle, that doesn't work. In principle, technology is a commodity. Don't use it until it's commoditized, because it's risky. So blockchain is a commodity now. People are using blockchain on supply chains today. You know, you got governments involved in it, you've got huge systems, lots of money. I mean, the person I was doing some analytics for was spending 12 million US a month on developing, throwing at projects per month. Okay, in startups and scale-ups, there's huge lessons to be learned. So it's a commodity. The ontology, if you'd like, and that's probably the best way to think about it. The blueprint for such an idea as ambitious as this has to use a technology base. It's the only affordable way. But actually, the key components are, and this is what I'm teaching business students from around the world today who are designing this stuff, are financial, and that's value. And I think Francisco really nailed it with the value, and Laurent has really referenced this as well, and what we can learn. So it's financial, which is actually value. That's human value and financial value. Governance, so that has to be a structured governance, and it's not standards. Standards, are there. And it's not technical standards, and it's too complicated for traditional technology of ADI. And you will never create all the systems together. No one's ever done it. There's never been able to create all systems together and deal, because they melt with the complexity. That's why we've been waiting for blockchain for 20 years, because what happens in blockchain, just to give you an idea, all of the things you need to know, all the points of truth, are actually contained in the smart contract, which moves down the chain, let's say with a parcel, and that's where all the rules are defined. So the other one is relationships. You have to understand that everything that's connected, that's people and systems and IoT, there has to be there. So there can't be basically the tension is centralized versus decentralized, and of course the two will have to meet. So if you look at that, it means local supply chains. There has to be local, smaller areas, because the big guys will lock out and kill all of the small ones. I don't know if you noticed, but Facebook yesterday announced that they're going to compete with Amazon. Well, who do you think are the casualties in that supply chain going to be? Woolies they're dead. They're all gone. It's just a matter of time in terms of these new business models that will shift over. And even places, so you got Alibaba, very effective. But if you look into that world that's going to drive it, you ask the question, does Australia even matter in making these decisions? Will it be able to determine its own destiny? And if you create a bubble and say we're not going to trade with anybody else on supply chain, yes. But if we're not, we're part of this bigger thing. So all I'm really drawing attention to is that it might be wise to do a quick scan, because what Tamanda's talking about is actually not future, it's history. And a lot of it happening now. There's casualties all over the place, but there are learnings in there of which we could get some value today. And my view is it should be value driven, both from the consumer. Otherwise, it's going to be cost driven, and that will block you. So if the consumer has to pay, they're not going to. So there has to be a value. You have to work out the value of everything. So you will get adoption, and there are values in this. So for example, the intellectual property that could be gathered from the analytics of such a supply chain could pay for its operation. All right, you can capture that. That becomes a tradable commodity. Okay, that intellectual property, it's a tradable asset. And these digital assets will be worth more than the institutions that generate them. That's the new world. That's what the kids are doing. So anyway, I'll leave that to you in terms of, there are so many, but basically, there are pathways through. In this country, what I would look at is the biggest project that's happening in blockchain is not supply chain, but it's B2B, is the IBM Data 61 and Herbert Smith, which are the legal people in Perth. They were given $1 billion by the government, saying, hey, go play with blockchain and AI. So they're looking at a platform. It will fail because it's a platform. Okay.
Laurent's probably got something to say about that.
What will come out
very
of it,
involved in that.
yeah, but what will come out of it will work. I mean, it's like these things, you throw stuff at it. I was in R&D in Silicon Valley. They have to, if it's all of those, and you push it till it fails, so you know its parameters. But what will come out of it, the leading light in this country, I think, which would be good for you to talk to, is Natasha from Herbert Smith. I'll send to Amanda the area.
Thank you.
And what she's saying is that actually it's not going to be, because the guys are really still trying to look together of putting these big systems, and she's very eloquent. She was saying what the difference between supply chain today and tomorrow and all of the business is, it's going to be, everything will be in that smart contract. Okay, all the rules. So for example, in Dubai, with the smart if you look at supply from a supply concept of purchasing property or house, they've put in all of the rules and regulations of the Torrens land registry. So you will be able to purchase a property under proper governance for less than a second, or a piece of land that would take 5 months a day, because it's an automated supply chain. No, they've de-risked everything. So the question is, well, would that work not from a technical point of view, but would it work? Would people want it? Would they need it? So I'll leave it to you there, but there's a huge amount that's already there to learn. And I think you could probably then jump 4 or 5 stages ahead and if you're able to grasp that.
Thank you very much, Stephen. I really appreciate you sharing those insights, because I see very much that this could shape the next topic, since there's a lot of interest in blockchain and smart contracts, and how we can learn from other industries and bring that into our food and beverage community. Definitely taking away, your experience, Connie, with building those small business-led community groups to drive change, and Francesco's work more broadly with government, and Deacon and Laurent's work. I may actually think that I'm just looking at time. We may have time for one last question or comment, but I know, Ant, we wanted to, I guess, get some sense of next steps as well. Ant, what do you suggest? Do I have time for one more comment, or?
Yeah, a couple of things. One is, I saw in the chat a little bit earlier, Stephen Lewis mentioned that pharmaceuticals and medical devices have centralized databases for end-to-end tracking in the US. And then Rob McKee said that a centralized tracking system is critical to achieve whole of supply chain tracking. And I think there's someone in the group who's got an opinion about first of all, a centralized database, and second of all, how to get all the other systems talking to a centralized database. I'm not going to pose the question around centralized versus distributed, and it sounds like the whole blockchain question has come up a few times, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to ask shortly about the topics we all want to hear about. It sounds like blockchain is going to be one of them, but I did want to ask, first of all, Robert Jurecek's opinion on the centralized database and the other systems talking, because I know that's a key area of your expertise. How do you get multiple systems talking to each other so that decision makers can make decisions based on dashboards and visible facts rather than guessing at things? And then the second question I had was actually one for Rona and Leonard, because I heard a couple of people mentioning that consumers will vote with their wallets, but Rona, I think you're onto a more sophisticated way of actually measuring consumer sentiment as it progresses. So can I quickly start with Robert and then move to Ronan?
Yeah, thank you. So I see it very simply in a way of internal traceability within your organisation and external traceability within the supply chain. Now, a lot of organisations, especially the smaller ones, are having to manage or at least understand products that come in when they're sourcing, if they're a distributor or a manufacturer, or products that are coming into their network, how they're managing those products, how they're managing the quality of those products, how they're managing, the temperature control, all those bits and pieces pertaining to that product. So there's that internal management element around traceability that a lot of organizations don't have, and are still probably managing these on spreadsheets or managing these on paper. So that's the first one, and probably the first and most important one in my eyes to consider, because you can't get to the next stage of external traceability and being able to manage, you know, a recall, or you manage, you know, your standards outside the organisation unless you've got that internal part done first. So I think the internal one we haven't discussed so far. We've only discussed the external component of traceability, which is that blockchain element. So I'm just trying to kind of, get some understanding around that. And I don't, it's hard to do the latter of the external unless you've got the internal stuff done. So if you've got your in-house in order around how you're receiving product, how you're managing product, how you're distributing the product, and so on and so forth, to know the lot numbers, and every single time it's touched in your operations, and every single time anybody does something to that product, whether it's apply a label, whether it's put packaging on it, whether it's, incorporating these ingredients to a batch, whatever it is having that information is the first port of call when it comes to traceability, in my eyes. And then the second part is everything else. So that hopefully, does that answer your question?
Yeah, what I'm learning is you know a lot about how these things hang together. You've got an opinion on it, and if I understand correctly, that's the core of your business.
Correct. So I'm more of the internal element of it. And then we kind of connect into, if it is blockchain or if it is whatever it is, whatever information needs to be added as a value add to a retailer, whether it's an ASN or anything of those natures, to know which batch, which product, use by dates, all those bits and pieces that are needed to manage the retailer side or manage at the consumer side. And that's what we provide. But in terms of the centralized external traceability components, that's still, obviously, that's what we're discussing, and I think that's still, to come and will come sooner than later, I think.
Robert, if I can shift from you've spoken internal, external. Ronan, we know there's internal stakeholders and decision makers, and external are the customers, the clients who buy the products or don't buy the products. You guys are making headway. Well, you've made huge headway in actually being able to measure that.
Yeah, interestingly, earlier Connie talked about what her customers wanted and going from that point of view, right, as that shifts. And although we're not supply chain experts, but we're not really that conversation is the fact that everyone can agree that every single industry has been disrupted in some way about what their customers now want, what they have fearful they are, what's the new normal for them. And one of the things that we do, which is different to almost anyone in the world, is that we track the beliefs and the concerns of those stakeholders, either customers or internally. So instead of having a snapshot, which might be just a survey and then it shifts, we're looking at and using AI technology to do this on a genomic level to figure out exactly what the beliefs and concerns are of that customer database, and to continue to monitor that. So it's not a snapshot in time, it's an ongoing one to learn to get closer to the pain points of your customer. What are their beliefs and their concerns? So not necessarily a metric of even just advertising or click-through rates or any of those kind of old, outdated methods, but a true, almost a voice of customer CRM that allows you to really understand in real time the beliefs and their concerns. And as they shift, ensure that you're shifting with them, instead of finally waking up one day and go, actually, the product I've been selling for all these years is now no longer relevant to my market. So it's a very agile way of ensuring that as these shifts happen and as huge ones happen, that you are with your customers all the way.
Yeah, clear. Nice one.
Yeah, and we found... Oh.
No, go, Connie.
Oh, I was going to say, I suppose for food design or food design thinking, has become part of the way we look at when we develop a product, even though we don't have the digital side of, collecting the data in that way and so forth. But yeah, getting as close to our customer and understanding their needs and all that empathy stuff and, the pain points, drilling down as much as we can. And we've always been a ground roots company anyway. So it's always come from that part. But we know that the better we get at that, the better we get at delivering a relevant product. And so I suppose for larger companies, it's sort of drilling down to the consumer as they become more demanding and wanting different things, and they want it very quickly. So I think it's really important to have that human-centric you know, as I said, the company's always been like that anyway, but it's obviously now really highlighted even more so. And having the technology to help you would be fantastic to get that insight. But it's nothing like really speaking to people and hearing, you know, what they want and understanding. It's really, priceless when you get close to your customer.
If I can just follow on there, that's brilliant, Connie, because it's actually, and it comes what Robert's saying, you look at the pain, because initially what you've got to do is reduce the pain, that system pain and human experience, and generate the value which is being spoken about. The technology, I'm indifferent to it, and basically the technologist is their problem and their job to work out the combination in order to fulfill the model you're looking at. So the sorts of things you need to know is, are you going centralized? Are you going to coexist with the rest of the world, with centralized, decentralized, or are you not? Once you say in principle, yeah, we're going to coexist with whatever we have to survive, then you need the agility in your, you need that model. Then the solution sets can be built to accommodate that. It's otherwise the other way around, and which is what you don't want. And then if you get that feedback that Robert's talking about, did you actually address that pain? Did you, did that work? Then it's those analytics which then become the gold. And then you become driven at some point, because the analytics going well, it just becomes, it will probably end up consumers' demand and supply. It's that brokering between, because we're going to be able to aggregate demand for the first time in human history. So why not? That's going to happen whether we like it or not. So that's what I'm really talking about, to be able to play both those sides. Thanks, Tam.
Thanks.
Tim, I'm going to jump in because I can see we've got about 11 minutes before we've got to end, and I do want to bring it to an appropriate close. I first of all want to thank Robert and Taminda for conceiving of this idea to bring this group together, and also essentially for financially underwriting it, because there's a lot of infrastructure, there's a lot of thinking, there's a number of people that work together to make something like this happen. So first of all, a big thank you to both of you for that. Enormous thank you to Taminda for facilitating, to Laurent, Graham and Francesco for being on the expert panel, and actually to everyone for sharing of your insights and asking questions. An amazing group, an amazing collective like this must be based on the needs of the group itself. And with your permission, I'd actually like to ask 2 questions, possibly 3, just to help guide us in terms of which way the topics need to go, which way a couple of things need to go to make this forum, to make this collective as valuable and as useful to you as possible. If I was standing in front of you and if we were in a room together, it might not be too long before we make that happen. We just got to fly Thomas in from the States and Taminda down from Sydney and anyone else in
even down from Queensland.
Okay. But instead of handing you a small white sheet of paper, we're going to do it a little bit differently. I would like to ask a couple of questions and we'd be very grateful for your feedback. So can I ask you please just to go to your email? So if you can open up your email right now, I'm actually going to ask you to address the email to Taminda and Rob. And for those of you who don't have the email addresses, I'll just call them out to you now. So I'll give you just a few seconds to get to your email.
I'll put my email address in the chat as well.
That's good idea.
Rather than
it's Taminda, Taminda at transmogrify.net.au. TransMogrify, transmogrify.net.au. And Robert is robert.jursek. So the Jursek is Jurcec, robert.jursek at OneCloudX, spelled ONEKLOUDX, onecloudx.com.au. And I'll actually go back. Can I just ask you to nod if you've got the email addresses and you're ready to go? Okay, fantastic. Thank you. The questions are really simple. The first question is, what's been the most valuable thing for you from today's session? So what one aspect, whether it was the actual conversation or the process or whatever it is, what's one thing that's been really valuable for you where you'd say at the next session, do that again or do more of that? What's the one thing that's really been good for you from today's session? I'll give you a short moment to complete that one, and then I'll ask the second question. And I'd also actually be grateful if the expert panelists can jot down your answers to these questions too. The second question that we want to ask, if you can just label that question too, what's one thing that you would recommend that we change? What's one thing that you'd recommend we change? Either introduce something or remove something from today the way we did it? What one thing, what's the most important thing you recommend we change if we're going to add more value to you and other colleagues who we and you might invite to join this group? While you're answering that question, I want you to imagine that we've got some very quiet classical music playing in the background. I see Graham Robertson is playing the violin for us there. Can you play violin, Graham?
No.
Okay, the third question is, we want to try and work out what are the most relevant topics for you. So to help us think about that, I'll ask you to consider, within the context of the food and beverage industry, what do you think are the most pressing challenges? What do you think are the biggest problems that the sector is facing, and specifically that senior execs and other decision makers in the food and beverage industry are facing? And with that as the context, could you possibly write down 1, 2, or even 3 topics that you think might be really relevant and interesting for this group? Because that way we can work out which experts do we know, who do we know in industry that's already solved the problems that you name. And that's the way we'll build the panels and make sure we keep it really relevant. So what 1, 2, or 3 topics would you like to hear discussed at future collective sessions?
So that's both pain and gain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because the gain side quite often gets left because it's people are focused on pains as opposed to opportunities.
Sure, thanks, Graham. So I did mention the biggest problems, maybe include now biggest opportunities, biggest positive things that you want to hear about.
Or even to Stephen Alexander's point, different projects, you know, in or related industries that would be of value for us to hear about.
Yep.
I'll give you just a couple of moments and then we'll move on. Okay, so in terms of closing it out, I did mention earlier that we had created these groups. We've actually paired people into groups of 5 or 6. And we do want to enable those groups to have more intimate discussions. A question that I want to ask, and I'll ask you if you can jot it in the email as well. One of the options we could do to bring those smaller groups together is to try and bring them together in the next 3 or 5 business days, because then this topic that we've just been discussing now is still fresh. It's still pretty hot in our minds. The alternative is we could look at diary management as the priority and suggest that we have these smaller group catch-ups about 2 to 3 weeks out from here. So can you please just express your preference in your email? Just write next 3 days or write next 2 to 3 weeks. That way we'd know what you prefer. Next few days?
And that wouldn't be the full 2-hour event. It's just a small.
No.
It's a smaller group, like 30 minutes.
Well, it might be an hour.
Might be 30 minutes to an hour, depending on the group. But just so you know, it's not blocking out another 2-hour session.
And finally, an amazing collective always has a platform on which to connect and communicate with each other. So I actually just want to ask this group if we were going to select a platform on which we could chat about topics of interest. Sometimes those topics won't be the topics that were featured in the collective, but just a great way for everyone in this group to connect with each other, follow up on questions, foster new relationships. What would the preference be? If I put up 2 choices and say one is a private LinkedIn group and the alternative is a private Facebook group, can you please in your email put your preference? So either put LinkedIn or Facebook, or if you have an alternative, please name it. So the heading there is group conversations. Group conversations. Next to that, please put your preference. The final thing I have for you is the suggested date of the next session. The suggested date that we have, we will try to run these sessions quarterly, and the next date we have is actually Thursday, the 30th of July. So please put in your diary if you would like to join the next session. Thursday, the 30th of July. It looks like 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. is a great time. More than likely, we'll host the session online again. And in the group session, on the group platform, we'll ask questions around whether you prefer to keep this format of online, or when restrictions ease, would you like to meet face-to-face, or will it be a combination of those? So here we are. My clock says 10:59 a.m. I want to express my extreme gratitude. If you could all please unmute yourselves. Laurent, in French, how do I say thank you very much?
Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Robert, Croatian or German?
Dankeschön, voila.
Dankeschön, voila. Francesco, Italiano.
Grazie tanto.
Again?
Grazie tanto.
Grazie tanto.
Grazie tanto. Do we have any other languages in the room?
I'm sure there are plenty.
Lupcho,
See you later.
Lupcho, what language are you going to give it to us in?
Macedonian.
Macedonian. Go ahead, please.
Blagodaram.
Blabe Bodaram.
Blagodaram.
Rob, you had another language.
Australian. See you later.
Thanks, mate.
Rob. And Noreen's
Noreen?
Okay, it's in Irish and it's long, but it actually says thank you. And it's Gurav Mila Margaret.
Gareth Mielmargaret.
Salamat po.
I want to close today's session.
As well.
We got Daniel, sorry, we just got Daniel Campbell saying.
Sorry, Daniel?
Salamat po, which is thank you in Filipino.
Salamat po. Thank you, Daniel. I want to close today's session by coming back to where we started. We know that Renee Geruso has the first prize around Ken Feely. Who would like to have a go? Where was Ken born? Where did Ken spend his first few years? Any guesses?
Canada.
I have only one hand up. It looks like Lupcho. Where did Ken start out, Ken? Lupcho?
Canada.
Ken, what's the correct answer?
Adelaide.
We got Canada, we got Adelaide. What's the correct answer?
Canadian born to Irish parents, and I've been in Australia since I was 12 years old.
There you go.
Okay.
Real combo.
The winner is Lupcho.
Yeah.
Thank you everybody so much for being in the session. We look forward to the next session together.
Have a great day, everyone. Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.